My first guest today is Editorial Board Member Matt Kaminski, here to talk about the situation in Syria. Welcome, Matt.
Good to be here.
And judging by this weekend's events, things seem to be worsening, if anything, in the region. Matt, what's the latest?
Well, there's a quite terrible, horrific massacre over the weekend that was discovered in a series of villages in Houla. About over 100 dead. Most of them were killed by pro-government militias that went door to door. An unspeakable number, I think, a few dozen up to 40 were children under the age of 10. So these are clearly innocents, and they're not people who are engaged in conflict. The UN, I mean, this has been going on for over a year.
What is the tally of the war dead that we know of?
You know, it's between definitely over 7,000, I would say. Some put it as high as 10,000. We don't really know. We can only go by what human rights groups are able to tally up. And this is basically an indictment of our inaction in Syria, and it's an indictment of the UN.
When you say our, who are you talking about?
Well, the U.S., the international community, and mostly the UN, because the Obama administration has put most of its chips on the Security Council. It's been a problem because China and Russia vetoed 2 resolutions on this. They've now come behind something called the Annan Plan, which was passed in the spring. That
Kofi Annan is the envoy to
the
Syria.
Former Secretary General of the UN, who came up with this plan with Assad, where they would put in place unarmed UN monitors, kind of blue helmets without any weapons, if you will, to monitor the a withdrawal of the army and a ceasefire. It's been an utter failure, and even we admitted. I mean, the U.S. has said that we were skeptical that this would actually work, but we actually did support it because we're not willing to do anything else.
Do you see any parallels between what's going on in Syria today and what President Clinton faced regarding the Balkans back in the 1990s?
I do. I mean, and actually, I was following the Balkans then, and it was, George Herbert Walker Bush didn't do very much in Bosnia either, and President Clinton came in and said, I'm going to be different. For 2.5 years, he did nothing too. And what's really striking about what happened over the weekend is it sort of brought back memories of the Balkans, where you had peacekeeping missions, UNPROFOR, they were these sort of great long acronyms that were deployed in Bosnia, and they were looking on as awful things happened. And the most awful thing happened in the end was Srebrenica, where 8,000 people were killed, and then this really sort of mobilized Clinton to do something. And it is really the U.S. that has to do something. In that case, we bombed Bosnian Serb positions, forced them to the negotiating table, and then deploy a lot of troops to monitor the peace, a real peace.
So you're essentially arguing then for using methods outside the channels of the UN to act in Syria. I mean, what is the...
Well, the problem with the UN basically is that we have given Russia, Syria is Russia's main client state in the Arab world, we've given Russia a veto over anything we can do. We've also very openly ruled out, this is what we won't do. We won't bomb because it's too risky and the Syrians have defenses. We won't create humanitarian corridors because that'll sort of, we'll clash the Syrian military, and we won't arm the rebels. So basically telling Bashar Assad, go ahead, do what you do. You may pay an economic price for this, but we won't really sort of stop you unless...
Well, I know you spoke with Susan Rice, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, you with some other members of the media a little while back. Were those the objections that she raised to the U.S. acting in Syria?
Yes, precisely. I mean, she said that it was really too early to talk about anything more beyond the economic pressure, which is not insubstantial and can be felt by the elite, and we are talking to the opposition. But she very explicitly, I mean, 2 things that struck me. One, that she said that the Annan Plan probably won't work, but it's the best game in town, and it is too early to talk about anything that would involve military intervention. And I read it, at least, my interpretation of her comments and generally of the position of administration is they don't want to touch this in a campaign year because they think that the public can't be sold on any sort of military intervention like last year in Libya or like Afghanistan and Iraq in the previous decade.